Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. And as you see, this is a Pride edition. So happy Pride for everybody. I'm so excited to have you here in UX and Tame. My name is Juliet. And look, the egg on my other side. Let's look at. I mean, I've been doing this for a while and it still didn't happen. Anyway, I'm so excited about our today topic because I feel like it's something that me as a UX designer and that I come from a boot camp is something that everybody always talk about. But because it's more like a checklist thing or framework that we do, I feel like we don't take a lot of time to talk about it. So how do we do and how do we create an inclusive persona? I'm so excited about this. Let's bring our guests because they will be better at talking about themselves than me. So, Aiden, welcome to UX and Tim. So excited to have you here.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. And I think for everybody that is joining us and you're part of the community, make sure that you are celebrating Pride your own way. You are not obligated to do it any way or another one. So we are happy to have you here and we are happy that you're part of the community. Why don't we start telling people who you are? Who is Aiden?
Yeah, well, I'm Aiden. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Either is totally fine. I'm a research leader / research wizard in the UX industry. I love this stuff, and I say I eat it for breakfast. Research is kind of my fun passion, also kind of weirdly like my hobby, so it's all mixed in together. I live in Portland with my partner and our evil little kitty who's probably around here somewhere. And yeah, I love Lego and magic and the great outdoors of Portland. And yeah, I'm just super excited to chat about personas. I've seen them like everywhere in every industry I've ever worked. I've seen personas. So I feel like this is like a kind of cross specialty engagement we've got.
And I feel like when we had the chance to do our intro chat, it's like, I have so many ideas to bring you over many times over. I invite you, have you as a guest speaker. And it was so hard to choose what I would like you to talk about for our Pride edition. But that's why we have more spaces and more time to do this. So what don't we tell? I know you told us a little interesting about you, but something unique and fun that no one else knows about you.
Well, I was a super all-star Girl Scout when I was growing up, which I always think is a fun fact because I'm obviously very masculine now. And so that is always a fun one because I got my Girl Scout Gold Award, which is like the Eagle Scout kind of like big thing you do. And LA County like Girl Scout office still has like my old picture up on their wall.
That's so cool.
I would love to like, go put like a mustache on it or something.
Yes. No, I mean, I feel like everybody that I have brought, they are so popular and famous, and they have done like coolest stuff in their lives. So thank you for sharing. It's like, and I mean, I feel like this is like American movies and Colombian, and I always see it like on the movies. I was like, oh, that looks so much fun. And about the cookies, I will eat the cookies. I don't know if that really you sell cookies, but I will be so bad at it because I will eat them. Yes.
Definitely.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. And I know that you are a UX researcher, but this is not what you did before. So what did you do before being a UX researcher?
Yeah, I like to say I've had lots of transitions in my life. And, I think the beauty of UX is that so many people come from different backgrounds. And it's really an interdisciplinary field that's one of the things I love about it so much and really drew me to this field. But I've been all over the place. I actually started my career in film production and television. I lived in LA, was born and raised there. And so it's just kind of a natural progression to be in the film industry. But very quickly learned that's not for me. It's not really for anyone. And really wanted to do something a little bit different. And I actually was in a screenwriting master's program, which is hilariously LA. And I was like, this is like so boring. This is like, I could do this in a boot camp. Like, what am I doing here? And I like, weirdly, I wanted something academic. I was like hungry for something like interesting. Had never been good at school before. But I found media psychology, which was an online program. They had a master's to PhD program. I was like, I could jam on this. This feels like a really cool like combination of all the things, questions I've asked before. And it's so funny when you talk to other people in the media psychology field, we tend to all say the same thing, is like we circle around the drain until we finally are like, okay, all right, we'll like dive in, you know. And so I did that for a long time. I have a PhD in media psychology, and got a couple masters along the way. And I really was into that. I really thought that I was going to be a professor for a very long time. But similar issue, really got towards the end and realized, oh, this is not what I thought it was. The institution that be is very capitalist and messy. And I'm also going to be paid $30,000 to do the work of 6 people. This is not going to work for me. So I had a friend who was a software engineer, and he had boked me for like years. He'd been like, I think you should check out UX. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm happy here. I'm going to be a teacher forever. And finally I was like, okay, I'll check. And as soon as I learned what UX was, and especially UX research, I was like, oh, like media psychology is just really the academic way of talking about UX. And UX is really the industry way of talking about media psychology. And it really, the important thing is that we're centering the human at everything that we do. And that's just kind of like my little journey to get here, kind of long journey, but I know a lot of folks have had very similar experiences.
I feel like as you were saying media psychology, I knew that you were doing this, but it came media psychic. It's like, do you talk to ghosts and spirits? And then you talk about going in circles. It's like, oh, okay, so they did really do this.
You know what? I'm just gonna say that from now on. That's great. That's perfect.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so what is this question? Oh my goodness. Okay. I don't even understand what I write down, so I don't know how to you understand. But what do you do now? So what is your what do you do now?
Yeah, so generally, I'm kind of an independent consultant contractor. I bounce around a lot to help different organizations either stand up their research practices if they've got nothing. Startups, I love getting in the startup space and helping folks just see where research can fit in, and then build out research teams if there's space and capacity for them. It's a little tough right now. And so right now I'm really focused on how can I enable product teams to do really exceptional research, whether or not they have a research specialist at hand for them or a team. And my whole thing is like, let's get off of Research Island. You know, let's really embed it in the process, because research is everywhere and everyone's doing it. You know, it's just the way we talk about it and the way we like show value and bring ROI and stuff. So that's really what I'm focused on now is helping researchers, but also helping product teams do great research.
And this is another topic that is like, we need to talk about this, like embedded researcher and like more like a consulting on the side, or no researcher at all, but this is in the future, not today. But as we were talking, our topic for today is how to create inclusive personas. So what it is, first of all, what is a persona framework? What is they came from and why? Yes.
You know, you can dig and dig. They're everywhere. They're pervasive. I've seen them. I can't even tell you, like, because I've worked in so many different industries and been a consultant for so many different clients. It's crazy kind of how far spread personas are as a framework, but at the same time, how standard they are, which is kind of frustrating because it's like, here I'm seeing marketing personas and academic personas for recruiting purposes and financial services personas and healthcare personas, and they all look the same. And that to me immediately is like all red flags, because they're all serving different purposes. And so when I saw them in the UX space, I'm like, ooh, we're just repeating the same old bad habits and not doing anything new with personas, which is kind of odd for a really innovative field like that we're in. And so that's part of it is I would suspect that they come from marketing and have their roots in that space, just because the intention usually is to like identify a segment of your customer base, and then usually put like a person in the seat of that. And we'll get into like all the the stuff, but generally marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's how I felt. Again, I switched careers like 3 years ago, and then we were talking about personas, and it's like, oh, what is this difference between marketing and I think I was like you were saying, like a red flag is like marketing is a lot about selling. How do we make sure that we can sell this to someone? Right? It's like, yeah, it was kind of confusing, and I feel like the other confusion for me, well, is like, when do we use these ones? Yes, like I do quite a bit of mentorship, and then when they're showing me their case studies, like, why did you ended up choosing a persona? And I think a lot of people said, oh, it was part of the class, so I had to do it, and this is what I have. It's like, okay, but why did you do this? So I think that's the bigger question. Yes, when do we use the persona framework? Yes, when do we use it?
I see most teams use them at the beginning of a project or when they're starting to learn about a segment or a particular problem that they're looking to solve. If they're building a product, typically, right, like that will be the first place they start, is to understand their users. And I think it's the intention is really good. The intention there is to build empathy. It's used as an empathy tool. I typically see workshops around it and all sorts of stuff like that. And that's great, all good intention. And so early on in a project, the other time where I see it actually being the most helpful in use is when you're making decisions about a product. And so you've got an opportunity, you need to decipher between different opportunities or different solutions, and you can turn to a persona to kind of help you answer some of those questions. You can turn to those as well to help you, again, ask why and keep asking why and keep digging. But you can also use them to really ask, how might we? And that's a great, question you typically see in the product space, is like, how might we solve for this by showcasing some of the common problems? And what personas do, I think their intention, right, is to pull data through and present it in a visually interesting way, in a digestible way. How often that's very successful is very rare, at least I see. You tend to it's kind of like a bad PowerPoint presentation. It's like they just throw like a ton of bullets and text on it. And it's like, okay, you've like completely defeated the purpose of this as like an artifact or a tool for anyone. And then it just ends up in a deck somewhere and kind of like dies with the research report.
Well, I was going to say, it's like yes, we have it at the beginning of the project and everything looks fine, and we use it like a marketing tool to present it to the different stakeholders. But then you mentioned, then it will be good to bring it back. It never comes back. It's like, when do we bring this person back, and when is the right space? Because at the end of the day, everybody forgot even their name or who they used to be. So. What is the major problems that personas have nowadays?
Okay, my biggest qualm with personas, just me, I'm sure others feel the same, is that they tend to perpetuate bias and they perpetuate incorrect, negative stereotypes about others. And they also don't help make decisions often. They don't really point to design decisions specifically. I think that's where they could have the biggest benefit. And they also have a tendency to point us in the wrong direction too. They plaster like a kind of ambiguous person onto these. And I think the difference though is like, I tend to see personas do that where they're like, okay, we're going to pick one person to identify like a large breadth of a segment. But archetypes are kind of the other side of this framework. And I've seen us evolve into archetypes a little bit more. And I like that. I think archetypes do a little bit better job to capture like an identity. Specifically though, they're capturing like a use. How are users using this technology? What do they need it for? What problems does it solve for them? What context does it exist in? That's really where the bulk of personas do their good work. But the problem is they tend to focus on these demographics that are really unhelpful. Like, I don't really need to know someone's age. That tells me literally nothing about how they use a product, what they intend to use it for. Like, and it just perpetuates stereotypes about people of that age. And you tend to see this especially, and I think in the worst setting is in healthcare, where there's already so many pervasive issues that disproportionately impact marginalized people. And so then when I get into a call all the time, I see it's like a person of color just plastered on a persona, and then it has all these negative stereotypes and demographics built into it. And I'm like, this is literally doing more harm than it could ever possibly do good. And then it also creates, in my opinion, some distance between us and the people we create for, which is kind of it's the opposite of the purpose.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, they try to make it diverse by trying to put someone there. If you want to hear something funny, the other day I was going through a case study with someone, and then we got to the persona, and I'm like, where did you get this information from? And they're like, oh, like I knew that they didn't do any research for this. And I mean, I'm in my 40s, and the age was in their 40s, and it says they don't know how to use technology. It's like, it's like, I'm 40, I don't know how to use technology. So where did you get this information? They're like, oh, I just made it up. I was like, yep, you just made it up because you didn't do any research, and you got to this conclusion by your prejudice and biases. So I'm like, okay. It was just funny because I'm in my 40s, and I'm like, oh, you got it all wrong. Anyway, but how prejudice and bias, I think this is where I was going to, how prejudice and bias are getting embedded into personas. And that's a big one, because me as a person, I have them all over the place. And how I make sure that me and what I think about different things don't get involved in when I'm creating personas.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep checking your personas against is, does this information help me make a product decision? Or is it just there because it's supposed to be there, because that's the template that exists, or that's the framework that I've always been taught to do. And I think a good way to gut check that kind of stuff is by looking just at if you were to search persona right now, you're going to find like 100 of the same kind of exact thing. They're going to ask you for name, location, age, probably racial, ethnic group, probably a bunch of stuff like that, in some cases can be helpful information. In most cases are not helpful information. And so I think too, like, we live in an age where people should know better, and I think like checking some of those demographics and some of the information that you're putting in there, and checking against the information you already have, can also signal to you that you've created some correlations between information that perpetuate stereotypes. Everyone knows what those are. I mean, it's fairly obvious. It's just about kind of gut checking that stuff. And also thinking too about your product team and your peers around you, the customers that you represent. If they were to see this persona and they were someone who was represented in it, how would they feel seeing that? I think the worst case is like, you've got a persona that's like terrible, and it perpetuates all this bias and stuff. And then you have someone who looks like that persona, maybe is the same age, maybe from the same background, and they're sitting in that meeting with you. And now it's not a safe space for them to be there and to participate. And so that's the kind of thing that I ask my teams to check their personas against.
And I mean, that's a good one. And I feel like something that definitely will help is to have a diverse team, because the diverse team, it will like flag out that right away. Yes. For me, being an immigrant and have worked in the immigration space and having like really close to work, like how the personas are and who are supposed to be like, I mean, I live around immigrants because I'm an immigrant myself. And that was, I think, really special to see, and really to try to put my heart, and at the same time, seeing it from the outside and how this can be improved. I feel like that was a good challenge on like, oh my goodness, talking about workshops and everything, because we brought a workshop where we brought a lot of stakeholders to create a persona, as they have a lot of experience in the immigration side, but they're not immigrant themselves. So a lot of comments will come up. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? So I feel like at the same time, to challenge stakeholders and bring up this, it helps. At the same time, like you were saying, it's something that it should be already embedded into if you're working in this space, but it's not like that. So again, work in progress as we go. So the question is, how do we do it right? Yes, like I really want to make sure that when I'm creating a personas, and mostly because I'm talking to a lot of people that is coming into the field and they're coming up from boot camps, or they are doing learning UX by themselves. And like you're saying, I Google persona, and then it's like, okay, let me take this template and like duplicate it and just put it on my case study. So how to do it right. But I feel like even before that, why should I choose to create a persona? Because I feel like this is one of the biggest questions. I know it's on the checklist, but why I wanted to do it and put it on my case study.
Yeah, I think a great time to do personas is when you've done a lot of customer research, and so when I have do customer research, I tend to put together, if I can, what I call an all-star customer team. Or all-star user group. And so they're essentially, people who I take with me for many months through the research process so that we can do continuous discovery with the same participants over and over again. We have access to them, that kind of stuff. Those participants or people like them can often become your personas, right? Your persona can be literally representative of a user. And that's often the best way to do it too, is to say, okay, we want to elevate the voice of our user. We have a ton of data to support it. We have we have quotes that we pulled from their own mouth, and they have consented to allow us to create this, elevate their voice and put it up on a picture, and spread it through our product team. That I feel like is the most helpful way to have personas, is because they're directly tied to someone real. And also early on, like in a project, I think that's also a good time to do a persona. But I think that's when teams really have to ask themselves, do I need to do a persona and really like pigeonhole one person, and carve out one space? Sometimes your stakeholders require it. I can't tell you how many executives and people high up in the food chain just have to see a persona. And so sometimes our hands are tied and we have to make personas. So I totally get that. But asking early on, like, do I really need to make a persona, or can I build an archetype? And I would push a preference towards archetypes because they tend to do a really good job of allowing you to combine a bunch of research data into some like big overarching themes, and then really tying those archetypes to decision making. Again, the how might we framework. If we've learned, that all of our healthcare customers have a hard time logging in because they forget their passwords, how might we enable them to save their passwords or to keep track of this? And so those are like things that help you really speak to a larger breadth of users. That's when archetypes are really helpful. And then again, personas, when you really want to narrow in on like one person and build empathy through their voice and through the lens of their experience.
So are we talking about that we should move? And I feel like mostly thinking that, and I know that I keep bringing a lot of people coming into the field and creating their case study. And it's something I won't be able to talk to a lot of people in the market in like this exact persona that I'm looking for. So we're saying that it's better to move more into archetypes and really concentrate in what is this as a whole community, and we bring something new and put personas on the side. Made me think about, again, the project that I was working in. It was a huge project. Again, it was immigration, and for me, I was saying for the project, it was really powerful because we were just like making sure that everybody understood who was this person and how we communicate, because it was the heart of the whole project. But otherwise, just thinking in small little projects is like, it won't touch that. And there is no one to sell this idea. Yes, there is no one, because it's my project and I'm working on it. So did I ask you this again? How to do it right? How we do it right? An archetype. Now we change. Let's change how to create inclusive personas, how to create inclusive archetypes. Yep.
I know, right? And I think it's so funny because I see these used interchangeably so much. And so maybe it's easier to talk about, like, regardless of what you call them, the idea is to remove the names. You know, we don't need people's names in here. We don't need pictures of people, to be completely honest. That's not how you build empathy. I love to get in designers involved and have them create little cartoons or like images or things that just like capture the vibe of that, or kind of like the persona, right? The identity of sorts that you're trying to create. But think of identity as more like a community of folks. And so a good example is like we had a large user group where they were like obviously very busy people. They didn't have a lot of time to take care of their health. Maybe they were like managing a ton of people's health. They were like a caretaker for folks. They had multiple full-time jobs, right? I'm not naming a demographic at all. I haven't said any ages or names or anything like that. And we called them the juggler. You know, and we had like a little image of them juggling things. And the important thing there was like, we need to solve for a user group who's too busy to do this for themselves, or too busy to look at a fact section, or too busy to learn a very difficult tool. And so that's more like the right way to do it, is like, what problem are we going to solve? Are we trying to solve for? What does our, like, the breadth of our user groups look like? What issues are they having? Can they fall into kind of these big buckets of segments? And then how are we going to think about those segments? Are we going to think, and if we're thinking through the lens of empathy, what's most important to these people? What it really shows up consistently across all of these different demographics, but is the same issue that many of these users are having. So you can build archetypes or personas or whatever you call them around those kind of like community identities to an extent. You can build them around problems to solve. You can build them around like support tickets. That's the coolest way I've seen them done, is like engineers then elevate those problems. And then you say, let's put a context to this. Let's talk about the ecosystem in which this problem exists in. And then you can get into some of like the fun background between being there. Using quotes from actual users, please put those on your personas or archetypes. It's a great place to start. And then otherwise, like some of the basic stuff, I think like something I don't see a lot of teams do that I love to like disseminate and socialize is digital literacy or technology literacy. I think is a really important one. Like you were saying, this person just threw on, okay, they're 40, so they don't know how to use technology. Like, okay, A, that doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. But B, like what they're actually talking about and looking for is digital literacy or technology literacy. And that is so variable, like across tons of different demographics. And so I think creating different like variations of digital literacy in your users can be really helpful too. Like, are they, really technologically literate and they really know how to use stuff? They pick things up quickly, or do they need assistance to understand something? That's when we're likely to get more customer calls or like call center calls from this user group. So that's where you can start to tie in data and inputs from different areas of the business, whether it comes from marketing, whether it comes from engineering, or it comes from your product team or like opportunity space. And that's where you should, like where I see good personas is when they're blending all of this information together.
I think what I love the most about this is how actionable it is. Yes, it's not like dreamy. It's like we can make this happen, and these could become like stories and or features. This is something like so tangible that I feel like sometimes with the persona, like the old persona doesn't feel, yes, like feels like anyone on the team can talk about this, like you were saying, like QA developers, product man, anyone on the team can really tangible actions towards this. So I love it. Is that what it makes the personas archetypes inclusive, or how to make them inclusive?
I think so. When I talk about inclusion, it's like you should always be elevating the voice of the person who has the lived experience. And so if we're doing that by using actual evidence from our users, using their quotes and their voice, continuously discovering with them and keeping them part of our discovery process, right? Like I always call I'm not a football person, but like Seattle has this like 12th man or 13th person, I don't know. Anyways, they consider their fans as like the other member of the football team. That's the same way that I want people to think about users. Your users are the other part of your product team. And so if they're along for the ride, if you're elevating their voice, if you're using data from the source, then it inevitably is going to be inclusive, because we're speaking through lived experience and we're not just pulling things out of thin air based on abstract concepts and bias.
Yeah. This made me think a little bit more about, now that we are in the Pride Edition and talking about our community, why is this important? Why is this important to have inclusive personas and archetypes for underrepresented communities like us?
Yeah, I think the first, I've been in the Pride space for a long time, in the DE&I space. People's first reaction is be like, okay, well, let's just bring a bunch of marginalized people in. And then the marginalized people end up doing all the work. So I think that's a big part of this. Is I'm not saying, we're not talking about good data. That's a whole different conversation. Garbage in and garbage out is still a thing. And so if you're not diversifying your data pools, if you're not looking at some of that demographic information to ensure, a diverse population, that's a different conversation. So that's feeding into this. But I think for when it comes to seeing personas, kind of like I was talking about earlier, like I don't think I've literally ever seen a persona with a trans person or non-binary person, like ever. Maybe once, and even then, again, it was perpetuating all these stereotypes that I see, like misrepresenting my community constantly. And I assume and have heard that's the same thing for other people of marginalized identities. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? We partially need to have good data. We need to have diverse teams to be able to do this, to have representation. But then on the other side of it, we really need to be grounded in the data and allowing themes and like findings, all that kind of stuff to ground themselves and then come up. A lot of times we see this stuff coming top down. We know that top down representation doesn't really exist yet. It's still a big issue. And so if we're grounded and we're bringing things bottom up, we're inevitably going to be more inclusive for the folks that we build for.
Love it. Okay. I think what everybody's waiting for. Steps to make an inclusive persona archetype. And I know this is a hard one because it could be different depending on the project that we work in and in so many different factors. But if you can give us some steps that we could follow.
Absolutely. A little hard without a diagram, so I'll just visualize with me. We're going to go on a visualization journey. Start with data. All of your research inputs. I'll kind of explain this like we have done on like Miro boards. I find those to be really like the most helpful, just kind of starting personas from scratch. Bring in all of the research you can possibly find. You go on a research expedition. And when I say that, because I tend to have a lot of teams who say, well, we know our customer. No, you don't. You're also not your customer. And so that's like a good thing to check. And then I tend to always like when I get into a new project, clients will say, oh, we have a little bit of research we've done. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Show me your research. And then I start asking questions, and then I start talking to other stakeholders. And I find that the stakeholder over on the other side of this department also has a research study. And then another stakeholder way over here also has a research study that's important. And so I always do stakeholder interviews out the gate on any project, even just for myself, so that I can uncover some of that miscommunication between departments, which often exists. And they tend to have a lot of research that actually can be really helpful for you building a persona. So talk to everybody in the product team, talk outside of your product team, gather as much as you possibly can, gather stuff from external resources, pay for a Forrester and Gardner report. Like if you can, pull a bunch of stuff, look into things, watch YouTube, all of that. And then get together with your product team. Do this together with people. This should not be something that's done solo. This is not a solo adventure. It should be done by everyone, just like most research. And so that's where a lot of workshops come in handy. We do workshops anyway with personas because they're great empathy building exercises for your product teams. So we'll go through the research together. I tend to have people take little chunks of research, and then we all come back together like a book report, and we talk about it, what we find, what was interesting, and then we start to plot it all out, right? And we're doing a little bit of affinity mapping, which is essentially taking a bunch of data and a bunch of stickies, as you can see them, and then sorting them and clustering them with like-minded stickies or different themes, right? And then we start to see patterns emerge. From there, we start to go, okay, what problems are we solving? What decisions are we going to have to make as we build this product or service? What unanswered questions still exist? What gaps are left open? Like, did we have enough research to work off of? Have we answered all of our questions? And then you start to build out kind of this like very vague type of archetype, or maybe a few. So you'll probably have 3 or 4. I usually see 3 or 4 end up being the case. Then you kind of have to decide, what are we building around? Are we building around like tech literacy? Are we building around like the ecosystem which this exists in? Are we building around like a specific type of user? So for instance, if you're in a healthcare space, maybe you're building for providers, patients, and payers. So that could be 3 different ones. So you kind of have to decide from all that you've got, how are we breaking these apart and differentiating them from each other? And so then you've got these like drafts, right? Go check them. Go check them with your users. Go check them with the rest of your product team. To socialize them, walk them around, test them out. And then once you're starting to see, some really big data pieces emerge that are really, there's not really a better way to explain them. They're just impactful. Like when you read a quote from a user and you're like, oh my gosh, that is literally everything I've wanted to put on a PowerPoint deck. Like that, when you have that feeling, and everybody does, that's the kind of stuff, right? And then you bring it into your personas and you're like, okay, now how might we? Can we ask how might we questions? Can we put some like general, like guardrails around this? And then how can we kind of like synthesize it a little bit more? And then find your highlights, right? So then you've got this draft and you're editing it, you're getting feedback and buy-in, and you've already done half the work of your persona along the way, right? You've already built empathy in your teams. You've already helped your teams understand their users. You've brought the team in to answer questions, ask questions, and get, answers. So it's like you're doing so much collaborative project management and work just building this persona. So that's part of it. The journey is the thing. It's not the destination. So I'd say that then you start to silo that down. And that's where you get to be a little bit fun. That's when I love to bring designers in. And they're already kind of along for the ride. So they're already jamming on like, ooh, how am I going to draw this out? What am I going to make this look like? What are my color schemes? So that's when like the fun kind of innovation comes in there. And then they shouldn't be static elements, right? Personas shouldn't be this thing that just like sit in a PowerPoint deck, again, sit in a SharePoint folder. Like that's not where they're helpful. They are iterative. They should be constantly changed and updated and used in different ways and adjusted. They really shouldn't be this static thing that just exists that everyone uses as like their North Star or their like true sense of like their single source of truth. Like that's not their purpose. They're there to help you kind of gut check your decisions. They're also there to continue to like have a place to build your research findings into. It's a better way than a report to show that your findings and your insights are valuable and that they're moving you forward towards decision making and things like that. And no products are static anyway. If you stop building your product, I don't know what you're doing. So you're always going to need to come back to these and iterate on them.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, but this is like an idea. If I have a research team, I hired you and you were doing this for me. We don't have the luxury many times, yes. And then we come back to I'm started. This is a new project, and is maybe the journalist, and I'm doing this. How do I do this?
Like low fidelity version.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would take honestly the same process and just not like if you are doing this solo and you're just trying to build an understanding of your users or whatnot, you can still follow mostly the same process just on your own. And again, it starts from like a big set of data or research. Go out and find that yourself, pull that stuff in. That's a really good exercise. And then again, do the affinity mapping, start to understand that clustering. All those are really great activities, especially for new people. 9 times out of 10, and I call them designer unicorns, like designers are expected to be researchers and they're expected to be good researchers. And so that these are really good exercises for new people, especially to start doing, because they're really low effort. They can be, right, you could spend 6 months on this, or you could spend a week on this. And so they're really flexible and adaptable to like what you need out of that. And it's a good thing to just play around with and try. So yeah, I'd follow almost the same process: the research, the mapping, the gut checking and stuff like that, but just in like a more shorter timeline and by yourself.
But at the same time, I love the idea of like, okay, I did this tryout and I kind of know how to do it. But I think in bringing that experience of like, this shouldn't be a solo work. Yes. And I know it's hard, and I don't know anyone, and there is no one. But at the end of the day, I think this is one of the coolest things about the tech community, and I will say the design community, how open people will be down to say, hey, I'm working on this and I need extra pair of eyes to make sure that I'm in the right place and in the right space. And people will put an hour of their day to help you. So I feel like go out into the community and ask. And I think people will love that. I think that experience, that working in a team and collaborate, practicing how to facilitate, practicing how to talk to stakeholders, even if they're like random people that you met in a Slack community. That's what is going to happen at work. So I feel like it's like, how do you find interesting and unique ways to create that experience, even for a 2 weeks project? I feel like that's so powerful. Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's beautiful. Because it's so true. Like people are so welcoming. And so I will tell that anybody that's new to this field, don't hesitate to reach out to people. I know it's uncomfortable and weird, especially for a bunch of introverts to like try to reach out to each other, but it really is a beautiful community, and people are more than willing to give you the time of day. There's also a ton of free tools that you can get in and access. Maze is an incredible tool. For rapid testing, you can jump in there and run a quick concept test. You can ask people a 5-minute survey, and people are more than willing. They in fact love to do this kind of stuff and participate in this type of research. So, just get in there and play around. There's tons of stuff for you.
And I didn't, or our project in one of the projects that I work, we didn't have the space, or not the space, the money to pay for people to help us in that discovery section. Yes, and it's hard because at the same time, it's like, give me all your information, but I cannot give you money. So I think at this point is when we come into how we created the community and the network that we have to create those bonds and to be really honest about what is going to happen. But a good one for the research. I feel like a lot of people is like, maybe I'm really shy and I don't know how to call message people about this. Something that I love too is, and I think maybe for the space that I wanted, there's a lot of information, a lot of people complaining and sharing their roadblocks or their pain points. There's so many Facebook groups, Reddit groups. This is a good space for everybody to start and kind of digging into where to find information, and not just to say all 40-age people don't know how to use technology. And if you Google, it will say that we know. Yes. Yes. I know. I don't know. I hope that the person is not. They know. And I make so much fun of this. Okay. So I feel like we are all good to go. But what are the things to consider to make sure that we are in the right space to make it inclusive?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff we talked about earlier, gut checking with your current knowledge. I mean, everyone should be trying to learn more and grow themselves in these areas, and inclusion and diversity and equity and all these kinds of things. So if you're already doing that work, you're headed in the right direction to make more inclusive personas. I think making sure that the representation exists in the room that it's being created in, and or that you're testing it with those people who represent those identities or those uses. Yeah, and really focus on like the use of a product and like the actual product things itself, like not so much on these like segments that are honestly more helpful, I think, in a marketing space to some degree. And like you said, a sales space, we're not doing sales in UX. So we're doing user experience. And so let's bring personas to user experience, right? And let's focus on the things that make experience great. I think for me, what comes to mind is the UX honeycomb. Is it seamless? Is it valuable? Is it usable? Is it all those things? And if you're able to answer those questions with your persona, you're inevitably, right, going to capture a lot of that data. The other thing is that like checking your data too, like where are you grabbing information from? Is it representative of a diverse population? Do you need to tap in to some other areas? Always, there are always gaps that exist. And the best thing that you can do as kind of like a proto researcher in this space, right, is to ask like, A, why, and also like, am I really doing the best job to represent people who are not me? So that's I think the most important thing to think about, and also to really respect respect that there are people who are going to have differing opinions than you, or going to have negative feedback, or going to really have like gut reactions to this. I think that's the case for me. I tend to have a really strong reaction when I see personas that just perpetuate a lot of bad, and I tend to react not great. So I think that too is like, be prepared for that kind of strong feedback and those strong reactions, and take them with a grain of salt. It's like, it's important to continue building these little by little, getting a little bit better and a little bit better. That's how you build inclusion, is just continuing to grow upon what you've built. So do your work in the other areas. Make sure you've got the right people at the table, or the best that you can. Yeah, and you're already doing the work by showing up and listening.
Yeah. And I love the first point that you brought out, and it's like learning and really taking the time to grow as a person. I feel like this is going to be one of the most powerful tools going into as our job, as we are representing our users. It's like, why do I think this? Where this came from? Is this real? Is this something that I do believe? And I feel like you start learning, and again, talking to people, like that diversity is going to bring you to a lot of things. It's like, oh no, this is not true. This is something that it came from somewhere, and I believe it. So I feel like that's such a big one, is for you to just keep learning and pushing yourself, and kind of going out of the box that you think that you are. Oh, you don't think that you are, but then you are like, oh, I've been in a box, so let's come out. Yeah, makes sense. What I'm always really interested in is like, okay, yes, we are making exclusive and we are doing all this work and pretty good. How is this going to benefit the product? Why is this good to do? Not just because of the user, but how this going to translate outside?
Yeah. Well, I think exactly what you're saying, and like checking your bias at the door, like just came to mind. That's like so important. But these can be, here's the thing: personas, archetypes, they're just one tool in your tool bag of like gazillions of tools to use to help define the product or your user, to help make decisions along the way, to help, again, like I kind of think of like a North Star. It should be part of that story. And if you think about like the product development space as like a narrative, right? It's just one piece of that narrative puzzle. And what it should serve, the purpose it should serve, is to elevate the voices of your users. You can use a ton of different tools to do that, but personas can be a great way to do it. So it's just, I think it's like, when asked, partially, a lot of times, like I said, stakeholders just immediately out the gate want personas. They don't know why. And so you're going to have to create them regardless to some extent. I see teams get most benefit out of the creation process and going through that workshopping and things like that. So as always, I'm sorry, it depends. It really depends. And I think just think about it again, like as something you can turn to if you know, like you've got great quotes for your users, and you have stakeholders that are really like feel that there's like an ambiguous kind of not like lack of understanding about your users and who you're building for. That's a great time to use these. They can be really valuable in that sense. And then, like I said, too, they can also be kind of like a report artifact to some extent, and they can be kind of an iterative report that you're always building research findings into. They can be much more visually interesting, much more accessible to your team. And so that you get creative with how you use them, and that will create value.
Love it. And I mean, I feel like I don't have any more questions, but if you could choose another framework to include in your research study, that will be really useful, could it be?
I'm going to say stakeholder interviews. I know it's so simple and it seems so silly, but that is where I find the most issues on a product team. Partially, I think of researchers as like the thread that weaves together a product team, because we have our kind of input and our fingers, and also like our support and help in all the areas of product development. We're helpful in all those ways. And so if you're going to take and put on the hat of a researcher for a project, or if there is no researcher, doing stakeholder interviews is that like incredible first step. I think all product managers and product owners should do it like out the gate. The reason being is because it's going to help you identify, again, miscommunication. 9 times out of 10, I ask stakeholders, what does success mean to you? And every 9 times out of 10, it's 9 different ways to define success. And then even too, like, what are we building? Why are we building this? What stake do you have in the game? Especially important when you're talking to executive stakeholders, because they tend to have their bonuses or even their job roles intrinsically tied to the success of this product or service. And so that's going to really create a lot of push and pull down the line. And so I think stakeholder interviews are exceptionally important to whatever fidelity you're able to do them in a project.
Something that I love about stakeholder chats is building the relationship is going to help you so good. It's going to be like diamond at one point of the product process. So beyond not just getting all this information, they're going to love you, and they're going to say, look at them, they really care about what I think and what I have to say. And it's such a good experience. And I feel like just bringing them back is like, oh, look, I gather all this information from you. Hey, can we talk in a month about how I'm using this information, and I can show it to you, and you give me your thumbs up? They love it. And then they talk about you, and they talk about your friends, about you. Yes.
Exactly. You're so right. 100%. Yeah. And they're like your participants. And the fun thing is, like, again, you're bringing the human to the center of your work. There's humans inside the product space, just like there's humans outside the product space. And so how we are human-centered designers at the end of all of this. And so your stakeholder interviews, just bring your humans back in.
I feel like we have just so many. I have a lineup of things that we can talk about, because I feel like this is such a serious, interesting topic, and how to do it right and when to do it. And at the end of the day, this is going to be a lot of practice, and you just get good at it by practicing with different type of people. So this is something that I will add on my list. So we have research, we have how to talk to stakeholders. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, we can do like a workshop on how to do an archetype persona. Just a lot of ideas came out. But Aiden, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing all of this. I feel like this is so powerful. And for a lot of people that is coming into UX design and heard about personas, how to do it right is going to help them so much in their careers, and how to translate these at work, and how to make sure that it's inclusive. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I love working with new folks in the industry. So if anyone needs any help, wants to chat more, just reach out. I'd love to get in touch.
I mean, I know that I put all your information in somewhere here. So make sure that you reach out. And everybody have a great weekend, and happy Pride for all of you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Happy Pride.
See you
Bye.
next time. Bye.